530, watching out for you.
Well, 38 years ago, as a young anchorman, I reported on Portland's homeless problem, living on the street for a week. 5 years ago, in a series of reports called Unsheltered Truth, I showed you how current homeless policies simply aren't working. 3 years ago, I documented the problem again in my series, Is Portland Over? Well, now there's a new plan to deal with the crisis. It's a solution being pushed by Mayor Ted Wheeler. I sat down one-on-one with the mayor to talk about it. I sat down with Mayor Wheeler inside City Hall to talk about his ambitious plans. Construct 6 large-scale campsites with housing pods, much like the pods used in the Safe Rest villages, each site accommodating at least 150 people, providing food, showers, safety, along with behavioral health and other services. Many support the move, but there are plenty of critics.
The politicization of this issue is really, frankly, it's disgusting to me. And I was shocked how many people came out and opposed the temporary alternative shelter sites by calling them concentration camps, internment camps, warehousing, forced encampments. In other words, people who should have known better weren't even willing to try something different.
It may be something different for Portland, but it's been working in other cities. In past reports, I've showed you a 400-bed bridge shelter in San Diego run by Alpha Projects, just one of several bridge shelters operating in that city. The goal? Get vulnerable people off the streets now while they wait for permanent housing. It's a similar model Mayor Wheeler is now pushing for Portland.
We are also tightening the screws in terms of community standards and expectations. You cannot camp wherever you want because it is not good for you and it is not good for the public at large.
So why is Portland only now adopting something that works in other cities? Look to the past. For almost a decade, Multnomah County leaders insisted that most homeless dollars be spent on permanent housing instead of large-scale transitional shelters. Drew Mosier is the executive director of the nonprofit behind the transitional shelters in San Diego.
Housing is important, no doubt, but it's really costly and really long-term. It's like telling passengers on a sinking ship, hang tight, we're going to build you lifeboats sometime in the next 3 to 20 years. We're about immediate pathways off the streets that are humane, compassionate, but also cost-effective.
Mayor Wheeler agrees.
I had a strong disagreement with the prior county chair. She had her reasonings for believing what she believed, but I believe that we had an immediate crisis situation on our streets that was drug-fueled, that was behavioral health fueled, that was public health fueled, that required immediate intervention. Emergency shelter, alternative campsites, programs like the temporary alternative shelter sites. I didn't see those as being in conflict with affordable housing. I saw them as being necessary precursor services that a lot of people must receive in order to be ready for affordable housing when that housing comes online.
Now there's new Multnomah County leadership and a new governor, both supporting the mayor's plan. The first alternative campsite is set to be built on property near Southeast Powell Boulevard in Gideon. Once all the sites are up and operating, the mayor says he will enforce no camping laws.
Trespassing rules need to be enforced. At the end of the day, we should offer people humane, workable alternatives at the scale necessary to be able to address the magnitude of the problem on our streets. We should do those things because we're a compassionate society. But on the other hand, we can't just give people carte blanche to set up tent sites wherever they want.
But there are those who call the no camping ban cruel and inhumane. So, where do we as citizens of Portland draw the line between compassion and tolerance? It's a question I first asked the mayor 3 years ago. I asked you that question a few years ago. What would be your answer now?
The same. There is a fine line between helping somebody and enabling somebody. And I believe that over a period of years, this tolerance for people being able to live wherever they want, anywhere in the city of Portland, including in very dangerous and squalid conditions, was not compassionate. And what I'm trying to do is get people out of a situation where last year nearly 200 of them died on the streets.
38 years ago, I reported on Portland's homeless crisis, living on the streets for a week. No one could have ever foreseen that decades later, the problem would be worse than we ever could have imagined. Will the mayor's alternative campsites work? There's plenty of optimism, plenty of pushback, but can anyone honestly say doing nothing, pursuing policies that lack urgency, keeping the status quo is working when it comes to solving what we see on our streets?
What I would ask my critics to do is, since this is going to happen, let's wait and see how it goes. Let's see how it goes. I actually think it's going to be very successful based on what we've seen around the country on which this model is based. And frankly, I think there's some people who are afraid we might be successful. They've invested personally in our failure. And so I am more determined than ever to prove them wrong.
Yeah, some pretty confident and strong words from the mayor. And of course, the new challenge the mayor talked about when it comes to solving our homeless crisis, this. Last week in my report, Anatomy of a Drug Crisis, I showed you how this rise in addiction, especially fentanyl, is now fueling the homeless crisis. To focus on affordable housing alone without providing addiction and mental health services won't help us solve this massive problem. Now, from that story 38 years ago until now, no one could have imagined the explosion of drugs and addiction on our street decades later. You can watch last week's report, Anatomy of a Drug Crisis, and last week's interview with the Mayor Wheeler addressing the drug crisis at KOIN.com, including tonight's story as well.